ASU and ASU Kerr acknowledge the 22 native nations that have inhabited this land for centuries. Arizona State University's 4 campuses and ASU Kerr are located in the Salt River Valley on ancestral territories of indigenous peoples, including the Akimel O'odham and Peeposh Indian communities, whose care and keeping of these lands allow us to be here today. We acknowledge the sovereignty of these nations and seek to foster an environment of success and possibility for Native American patrons and communities.
Well, hello, good morning. What a lovely crowd. Thanks so much for finding us this morning on this beautiful day where we might actually get rain. My name is Tracy Mason. I'm the general manager, today the house manager, your parking attendant. It just kind of, you wear many hats when you're in a small staff and the flu and colds are going around. You just fill in. So that's how we do it here at ASU Kerr. We love that how you do it is that you're bringing your friends and relatives. Thank you for that, because look at this house. That's what we need. We need your advocacy. And of course, to keep the lights on and everything, if you're able to do the $5 donation suggestion, or if you can dig a little deeper and do a little more, or come see the paid shows, all of those things really, really help us. Now, I'm going to keep this nice and short, and just for those who are new to the venue and you need the restroom, it's right back that direction. There's also a drinking fountain back there. Please check your devices so that we don't have interruptions that are just kind of an annoyance with this wonderful presentation today. And, we really appreciate our donors and volunteers. That's another way to help us big time. If you are interested in digging a little deeper and helping us out, if you go to the box office, I'm sure Swaraj and Tommy would be happy to help you out in that department. And, we are coming to the close of our season, but we do have some pretty amazing things still coming up. So we work with some other organizations, Bridge Initiative, and if you like Broadway, they often do some shows here which are songs and stories and discussions about Broadway, and they're all with professionals who have either been on Broadway or off Broadway. And they're incredible presentations, so that's another way. And the pricing is very reasonable. Another thing, exciting thing coming up, if you like true stories about science, Story Collider is taking over our Gather series. And that is coming up very soon. Take a look at the website, sign up, get our notices, and you will get to find out what's coming up and when. Now, I just want to ask a question really quick, because we are now in April, and I would like to see the hands of those people who live here full time. Holy moly, this is great. Okay, so thank you so much for coming here, and we hope to see you again. And right now, please, one last thing. I cannot forget Renegade Coffee. Isn't the coffee and coffee cake amazing? Oh, what would we do without Renegade Coffee? And they're right down the street, right down McDonald. And that is such a lovely thing. And that's something Mrs. Kerr used to do. She used to provide coffee at her events. So if you want to find out more history about Mrs. Kerr, you just have to go to the website or ask me. I love to talk about her. But in the meantime, we have a show to do. So please put your hands together and welcome Dr. David Schildkrit.
Students always just called me David. It's fine. Well, what a terrific turnout. I will never, ever recover from the idea that people come voluntarily to one of my lectures. Absolutely a shock. But I know why you're here. You're here because Verdi's AIDA is an enduring classic, a piece that we all love and look forward to the rare opportunities to see and hear. If my information is correct, the last time AZ Opera did AIDA was in the 1998-99 season. So in other words, literally in the last century. My students asked me if I was born in the 1900s. I feel like we should be wearing hoop skirts and top hats and stuff. Verdi's Aida, of course, the thing we immediately think of is Old Kingdom Egypt, and this is the cover of the original piano vocal score for the work. And if you know the opera at all, you know that that's the scene for the last act. There are at the bottom Radames and Aida slowly perishing because they've been sealed in a tomb, and then on top is the other scene going on. Very innovative, very interesting idea that Verdi had to juxtapose these two moments and these two emotional ideas, and that's part of what I want to help us understand this morning. But first, I also have a quiz. How many of you have seen Aida before? Okay, about half. How many have seen it at Arizona Opera? That's going to be a very tiny number. There we go. All right. And how many of you are seeing any opera for the first time? All right, we especially like those people. We love the ones who come back. I have to get this plug in. Ever since I was in college, which is a long time ago, that was in the last century. I graduated from high school in 1974, so okay. And when I graduated from high school, everybody was lamenting the fact that audiences for opera and classical music were old. Now, I can do that math, okay? The audiences may still be mostly gray-haired, but they can't be the same gray-haired people as they were in 1974, or they'd, all be wheeled in on gurneys. So I think we don't have the right answer about where the audience is coming from and who the audience is. I think it has more to do with when you have the money, when you have the time, and when you have the inclination. That we can, when you don't have to find a babysitter, remember those days, So I'm not too worried because, to paraphrase the scripture, the old you will always have with you. So, and as now I am one myself, I feel like I can say that with some impunity. But so if you're seeing Aida for the first time, but this is not your first rodeo, I think you're in for a great treat, especially the way AZ Opera is going to present Aida. But before we get to that, let me talk about the work itself. And I want to kind of tease out two ideas. One is that this work is sort of definitive of what grand opera is. Now, we use that phrase grand opera a little bit loosely. It actually has a rather specific meaning in the world of opera, and I'll talk more about that and why Aida is kind of a perfect example. But the other thing I'd like to tease out is how this is, despite the fact that it's quite unique, it's nevertheless an archetypal Verdi opera. It has all the elements we expect in a Verdi opera, and it's what makes it a powerful piece that we want to keep hearing again and again. First, let's look at, this is a fairly late work of Verdi's. It was written and premiered in 1871. He was born in 1813, so he was in his late 50s and actually semi-retired when he wrote Aida. So let's look at Verdi before Aida. Between 1842, when the Nabucco had its premiere, and La Traviata in 1853, Verdi wrote 16 full-length operas. That's 16 operas in 11 years. He himself referred to that as his period of being a galley slave. It also made him unbelievably rich, because these operas, and they're all the ones you know, Traviata, Rigoletto, Trovatore, Nabucco, Macbeth, these made him enormously wealthy because they had been incredibly successful, and he was successful all over Europe, had a terrific career in Paris, went as far as St. Petersburg to premiere operas of his. So this guy was literally world famous and absolutely wealthy. So by his 50s, he could actually retire more or less, which he did. Between 1855, when he did the French version of I Vespri Siciliani, the Italian version was the next year, and 1867, so that's a 12-year period, Don Carlos, 5 operas. Now, actually, that's a normal output for any mortal, 1 every 2 years, that makes sense. But for Verdi, it was a bit of a slowdown. And part of the problem was librettos, texts. He just had trouble finding stories that he was interested in, that he thought would work. Don Carlos, which we now think of as one of his truly great operas, was met with mixed reviews and had been problematic at its premiere. And he kind of was more or less going, you know what, I'm done. I've got all the money I need. I'm living this comfortable life on this estate in central Italy with my new wife, who I've been living with for 10 years, but never mind that. And, you know, I don't need this aggravation. And so he was not too interested when he was approached. There he is, by the way, at around the time of AIDA. Which opera are we doing? He was not too interested in writing an opera when he was approached in 1869 as the Suez Canal was being completed to write a piece, an opera or something else to celebrate the opening of the Suez Canal. Now, I don't think you can overstate the importance of the Suez Canal. Think about your geography. If you want to get from anywhere in Europe to anywhere in Asia, India where the spices are, China and Japan where the silk is, you've got to go around Africa. That's a journey of over 5,000 miles before you even get anywhere. When you have the Suez Canal, you can get from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, which takes you down into the Gulf of Arabia and into the Indian Ocean, in a fraction of the time. It cut something like 10 days to 2 weeks off the trip, with all of the attendant cutting of costs and so forth. And it was certainly not the first canal. It wasn't even the first canal in that location. There were canals in ancient times. But it was one of the first major canals in the 19th century, and it transformed trade. It still does. You might remember a couple of years ago when a ship got stuck in there and how all of our Amazon deliveries were late. I mean, it really is of huge importance. So they wanted the world's leading composer to write a piece, and that was unquestionably Verdi. Now, there may have also been some political connections for this. I mean, why not get Wagner, for example? Or the other choice might have been Gounod. But Verdi was bigger than either of them, believe it or not. And Verdi would have been interesting to the Egyptians because he was Italian, and there was a long connection between the Italians and the Egyptians. After all, they're just across the Mediterranean from one another. And Verdi was also political in a way that would have been attractive to the Egyptians. Remember, by this point in the 1860s, he's actually a member of the newly formed Italian parliament. We don't often remember that, but he eventually became a senator. Senator Giuseppe Verdi, imagine. So he was approached to write a piece, and at first everybody thought he'd write just sort of an orchestral choral piece, a hymn of some kind. He'd done that on an occasion or two, but he refused. So they approached him again because they were opening around the same time as the canal. An opera house was opening in Cairo, the Khedive Opera House. And Verdi was approached to write a new opera. And again, he demurred. But around the same time, Camille Duloc, the manager of the Paris Opera, said, you know, Joe, I've got this great story. Giuseppe is Joseph. I've got this terrific story, and I think you'd like it. And Verdi actually was taken with it right away. That and a fee of 150,000 francs, which was the equivalent at that time of 30,000 American dollars, but we're talking 1870s. So nowadays, that would be roughly between $500,000 and $750,000. I wonder, I have no proof of this, but I wonder if Verdi thought, okay, you want me to write an opera? 150,000 francs, thinking there's no way they'll ever go for this. And then they did, and he had to write it. We've all done that, right? It's thought, oh, I don't want this job, so I'll make an outrageous request. In fact, they had to open the opera house with Rigoletto because the sets and costumes for AIDA were being built in Paris, and the siege of Paris happened. And this was part of the ongoing Franco-Prussian War, and they couldn't get the stuff out of Paris and over to Cairo in time. So the premiere of AIDA did in fact take place at that opera house in Cairo, but not until 1871. It was actually done on Christmas Eve, 1871 was the first performance, almost a year after it was originally meant to be performed. By this time, the Suez Canal was up and running, and really an engineering marvel and a technological triumph of the first order. So Who was the Khedive of Egypt? You always read that this was commissioned by the Khedive of Egypt. Well, that's not a word I know very familiarly. It actually is a Turkish word that means viceroy. And it's important that he was called the Khedive of Egypt because up to that time they had been called governors. Egypt at this time was part of the Ottoman Empire. It was actually ruled out of Turkey. But as was happening a great deal in the second half of the 19th century, many of these countries that had been colonized or part of larger empires were trying to break away and break free. And this Khedive, known as Ismail Pasha, who lived from 1830 to 1895, was a great modernizer. One way to put it. He was also cozying up to Europe. I think a lot of powers at this time, by the way, I've just come back literally from a trip to Hawaii, and I learned a lot about how places that are colonized try to figure out how to survive in the face of colonization, okay? So this is always a complicated history. There are always indigenous people who will invite the conquerors in because they think that's maybe going to work out better. Just not to get too far off the subject, but in the case of Hawaii, everybody was competing for Hawaii, and they kind of decided that we were the best bet. They may have regretted that later, so literally, we were invited in at one point and then took over. The same is going on with Egypt. They can see that their future lies with Europe because otherwise Europe's going to take them over. So what do? We try to become somewhat more European, and we're going to have this tremendous canal. They work out a system whereby we have part ownership of the canal, so it all looks good. The trouble is that as Pasha is trying to modernize, as he thinks of it, Egypt, and he even says, I'll read this because it might be a little small, my country is no longer only in Africa. We are now part of Europe too. It is therefore natural for us to abandon our former ways and to adopt a new system adapted to our social conditions. Now, what he means by former ways there might be political, might be religious, might be cultural. But nevertheless, he's reaching out to Europe. Unfortunately, it causes enormous costs. And eventually, and maybe this was the plan all along, the only solution to the economic problem is for Egypt to sell its shares in the Suez Canal to France and England. So now the canal is not owned by the Egyptians anymore. It's owned by the French and the English and remains that way until the Suez Crisis of 1950. 1958, thank you. And then the canal remains closed for a little while, right? And then Egypt finally takes it over in 1970 under Nasser. So that's a vexed history with all kinds of complications. But this is the guy that wanted Verdi, and you can see that what he was trying to do, that why he would want Verdi, right, is to be part of this outreach to Europe and feeling part of the community of powerful nations is what's going on. So of course, you get the greatest composer you can find. So how is this opera archetypal Verdi? Well, at the center of the whole thing is a family conflict that goes up against country loyalty. Verdi loves a story like that. So in case you don't know the story of AIDA, briefly it is this. AIDA, the title character, is an Ethiopian princess. The Egyptians have recently defeated the Ethiopians, so she is now a slave to the Egyptian princess, Amneris. So she's a slave in the household. The only problem is that they're both in love with the same dude. So Amneris, the princess of Egypt, expects to marry Radames, who is the general of the Egyptian forces who has defeated the Ethiopians. And now he's in love with, and she in turn is in love with him. He's in love with the princess of Ethiopia. This is complicated, right? Like they say on Facebook, it's complicated. So it's a love triangle, but it also has this love story against the backdrop of people who should be enemies. Verdi finds that absolutely irresistible. And if you think of the plots of Verdi operas and how many of them involved conflict between father and daughter, Traviata's a little bit indirect because he's kind of her father-in-law, if you will, but he does the same thing, right? You've got to leave Alfredo because it's affecting our family. His sister can't marry who she wants to marry. Rigoletto, a father and a daughter. Verdi is really drawn to this relationship and then putting tension on that relationship and seeing what happens. So that's part of why this is so appealing to Verdi. And so I thought we'd hear a little of the music that sets that up. Our wonderful baritone, Yishin Shui, is going to sing the aria that Amonasro, this is Aida's father, sings when he first enters. And he's going to lay it on about how terrible she's being.
Hello, my name is Yishin Shui. I'm a baritone in the studio. I'm a studio artist at Arizona Opera. And I'm covering Amonasro in AIDA. So in this scene, it is before the Act 2 finale, when the Egyptian captured Ethiopian prisoner, including Amonasro, who is Aida's father and also the king of the Ethiopia. And in this scene, they asked, like, who are you? He said, I'm her father, and I also fight for my country and fight for my king. But he's a king, but he disguised himself. He said, I fight for my king. The king is already dead. And if loving my country and fight for my country is guilty, then we are all, we are all guilty. And after that, he's asking the mercy from the Egyptian king. Questa sisa ch'io vesto vi dica che il mio della mia patria difesa fu la sorte a mostrarmi nemica orno vano de forti l'arrir al mio piede la polve distesa già qui reda più colpi traffido se l'amor della patria e dell'ita sempre tutti siamo pronti a morir. Mature tu Signore possente, Augusto ti volgi clemente, oggi noi siamo così dal fato, ad voi potria il fato colpir.
You don't want this guy mad at you, especially if he's your father, And so it goes on from there, and Amonasro is going to really play on Aida's sense of patriotism and how could she be with this guy, and maybe she could spy on him and find out what the plan is and so forth. You can just imagine the complexities this takes. So poor Aida gets torn between these two worlds. Now the other point of the triangle is the pharaoh's daughter, the king's daughter, Amneris. And that is a huge and, if you will, somewhat thankless role. I have many friends who are mezzos. I have a daughter who's a mezzo. And they always say, "Ugh, I work all night and then AIDA gets all the applause." But we have a treat, and that is Sedona Libero is going to sing Amneris's aria from the fourth act, the final act, where she has to decide how she's going to handle this whole problem of the fact that she's in love with Radames, but he's betrayed the Egyptians, and what she's going to try to do about that. It's not easy.
Good morning, afternoon. My name is Sedona Libero, and I'm a first-year Mariners Poland studio artist. And in this excerpt, this is at the very beginning of Act 4. So Radames has been arrested for revealing Egyptian war plans, accidentally kind of, to Monastro, clear the Ethiopian army. So you can see why he might have been arrested as a traitor, and he's about to be tried. And Amneris has conflicted feelings. At first she says death to him and to AIDA. And then she says, but wait, I still love him, and I'm gonna try and save him. Guards, bring him here. Let's work this out. So yeah, that's this excerpt.
La borrita arriva, io mi sfuggia. Dai sacerdoti Radames attende, dei traditor la pena. Or rivelò di guerra l'alto segreto, egli fuggir voglia, con le fuggite, traditori tutti, a morte, a morte. Oh, che mai parlo. Io l'amo sempre. Disperò coi sangue questo amor che la mia vita strugge. O sei potesse amarmi, vorrei salvarlo. E come? Si tendi, guardie, Radames qui venga.
Imagine revealing war plans to someone who shouldn't have them. So you see, these things aren't new. And what makes this quintessential Verdi, in terms of the plot anyway, is what he's doing is he's putting these characters in impossible situations. There is no win-win in any of this. There's only lose-lose. And it's only a question of how they're going to lose and what choices they will make. Verdi's putting these characters in situations where there's no good choice and then trying to see what kind of choice they will make. And that's really the thing that motivates the opera. Musically, as you heard there, it's also got wonderful elements of Verdi's beautiful use of the human voice, his ability to write a really engaging melody. But what you might also have noticed about those two excerpts is they don't really feel like they end very satisfactorily. Because by this point, Verdi has moved away from what we might call number opera or opera based on the scene. You think of Traviata, it's very easy to excerpt the arias from that. By now, everything's moving along pretty continuously. It doesn't stop and start in quite the same way. So it's a little harder to pull things out that will feel satisfactory on their own. And that's part of what you heard. Now, I also mentioned that this is archetypal grand opera. So what is grand opera? It doesn't just mean big, right? We tend to use this loosely now, so we have opera companies called, for instance, Houston Grand Opera. Well, can they never do Mozart? Well, of course they do Mozart, and that's not really grand opera. Grand opera is a particular kind of opera that originated mostly in France. We associate it with the composer Meyerbeer, whose music we almost never hear anymore. And part of the reason for that is these spectacles are really hard to put on. They require huge casts, big orchestras, very elaborate sets, often animals. And so there's one, in fact, where there's a ballet of nuns on roller skates. I'm honestly not making that up. The opera is Robert le Diable, and there's nuns on roller skates. So the elements of this are a sweeping historic spectacle. So, for example, probably Meyerbeer's best-known opera is The Huguenots, Les Huguenots, that takes place against the backdrop of the St. Bartholomew's massacre of the Protestants in France. So that's the big historical tapestry against which this drama is being enacted, and then what you do is you focus on a couple of characters and their personal story against this big backdrop, a bit like a 1970s disaster movie. You know, it's like the Poseidon Adventure, only in opera. So it involves spectacle, stage spectacle, nuns on roller skates, the personal story against the backdrop of big events, but also the contrast between the big public moment, which is so central to grand opera, and then the private reflection, emotion, or conflict from an individual character. And there's a moment in AIDA that's absolutely classic grand opera. Radames is being sent off to war to fight the Ethiopians. The big triumphal march is happening, and everybody shouts, "Ritorna vincitor," come back the victor. And AIDA gets caught up in the moment, and she too says, "Ritorna vincitor," and then realizes that she's rooting for him to kill her own people. This is a problem. And so everybody leaves the stage, and by herself she sings, "Ritorna vincitor," what have I done? That's classic grand opera, is to go from the big, big scene down to one person commenting on it and what it means to them. So that's what makes this quintessential grand opera. There are a few other features of this opera that are worth pointing out. One commentator says that this is the one Verdi opera whose setting you can't change. It has enough local color, enough Egyptian color, whatever that might mean, that you can't transplant it to some other country and have it work. Whereas Traviata could take place almost anywhere in Europe, for example. Even Nabucco, his big historic opera, doesn't have much about it that's Babylonian, really. And the most famous bit of that is the chorus Va Pensiero that everybody knows. Va Pensiero, ta-dam, ta-di. I shouldn't sing after those people. That was a bad idea. It's like cooking French food for Julia Child. But that was so Italian that it became an anthem in Italy. Right? There was nothing about it that necessarily spoke about Hebrew slaves. But this opera has a lot of music in it that Verdi means to evoke Egypt. Now, there's a little excerpt that we'd love for you to hear. Jennifer's going to play it on the piano. This is our wonderful pianist, Jennifer Hoppy. She's going to play you probably the most famous music. But I want to plant this music in your ear. Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks so much. I think if we didn't know that that was from AIDA, we could use it as a graduation march, couldn't we? Right? It's processional music, and there's nothing especially Egyptian about it. Or is there? Oh, I have to slide in the wrong place. Hang on. Oh, gee, whoever set this up? Okay. Phew. I put it in the wrong spot. All right, so you have that music in your mind. Man, I blew my good setup. This is a video. This is a video promoting tourism in Egypt. Listen to this.
Welcome to Egypt's Red Sea Riviera, where the sun always shines, every day of every year.
I want to go, I hear people saying. This, understand, is produced by the Egyptian Tourist Board, adopting Verdi's music. So in one sense, Verdi and Ismail Passa were very successful, weren't they, in sort of how making a connection between Europe and Egypt. But, you know, it's I think a little bit of a stretch. There is other music in the opera, especially that sung by the priests, that is meant to evoke ancient music. Now, of course, Verdi had no models for this. He didn't know what ancient Egyptian music sounded like. To this day, no one does. But he evoked something. Now, how accurate was he? One thing he has, for instance, that we're pretty sure didn't exist in Egypt is priestesses. So he puts that element in there. So he had good academic sources to rely on, but didn't always rely on them. Now, I want to back up, because I made a mess here, okay, and show you a little bit about the AZ Opera production, and then I'm going to ask Joel Spector, who's here, to come and talk to you a little bit more about it. One of the challenges of AIDA is that it is a grand spectacle. So how do you deal with that in 2025, to say nothing of if you have a lot of livestock on stage, you have to clean up after them. So how are you going to deal with this sweeping drama in a 2025 setting? So here's a little glimpse of what Arizona Opera is going to be doing.
Return victorious. My lips have spoken the traitorous words. Victorious over my father, or of Radames, who I love. The sacred words, father and lover, I can no longer speak them. My mind lost in a bitter night. And in such cruel anguish. What can I do but wish to die?
So Joel is here. Oh, good. Joel's going to talk a little bit about how they're doing that wonderful thing. Here you are. This is Joel Spector, General Director of Arizona Opera.
I'm wearing two hats today, General Director of Arizona Opera, and also from the Egyptian Tourism Bureau, where we lifted that music. Those sea turtles cost a lot of money, guys. It's great to be with you today, Dr. Shilkret. Wonderful to, well, you're talking about how tough it is to follow your singing act, after hearing each head in Sedona. So I have to be a public speaker after you, similarly difficult. For those of you that are really immersed in the world of opera right now, in fact, any of the traditional performing arts, this is 2025. This is a really wild time to be in these kinds of roles. We're trying to figure out new and exciting ways to bring our work, and especially work like Verdi's Aida, to our stages for the public, while at the same time trying to figure out how to do that within a pretty, charitably speaking, variable resource mode. And we have to be jocular about it, because we are friends here and we all want wonderful things to happen. We want to live in a community where we're able to bring great works of art to life. So one of the ways that opera companies have been adapting in this kind of environment where people are really worried about what's going on in the world, is causing people to be a little bit more reserved in their philanthropy. Worth mentioning that opera companies, business models substantially rely on about 80% of philanthropy donations in order to do the work that we do. So what do you do? What do you do when AIDA consistently is one of the shows that people say, we would love to see this, we would love to see this again? It's been a long time since we've put it on the stage. And so how do you do that? Companies all over the country are frequently replacing a fully staged opera production with a concert of an opera. That's something that's happening a lot. And in fact, that was the first thing that we looked at in terms of how we could make AIDA happen. Because there are all these kind of cost multipliers that I'm not going to bore you with the whole business thing, unless it's helpful. Then you can join us for a finance committee meeting. The next one's April 28th. Mark your calendar. Cassie will circulate the Zoom. We started with you. We started with asking you over the course of the last few years, what is it that you want to experience from us in terms of opera? And the two operas that consistently and emphatically were at the top of that list were AIDA and Turandot. And they have been similarly difficult to program for the same reasons, that they're enormously expensive to produce, mostly because of the massive musical forces involved, which you got a small hint of in that video. And in the case of Turandot, it's also not in the public domain, and there are certain licensing rights associated which make Turandot even more expensive. Okay, so then that brought it to AIDA. How do we do AIDA? We'll do a concert of AIDA. Okay, well, that makes sense. Still expensive, but like, man, we get to, if you're an opera fan, you can close your eyes and listen to Verdi's AIDA and have a wonderful evening. And all the more so when you have an incredible cast, like the one that we've assembled for you. Leah Hawkins, who is going to be making her role debut here as AIDA. She's one of the most exciting rising stars at the Metropolitan Opera and elsewhere. She won the Beverly Sills Award just last year. And she chose Arizona Opera as the place where she's going to debut this role, which is probably going to be in her portfolio as a prominent, she might retire off of AIDA. It's going to start here. Hopefully it won't end there, but. And then we have Lemmy Pulliam, who sang Radames at the Metropolitan Opera itself as our Radames. Jennifer Johnson-Cano, who's very popular, mezzo-soprano, and also the wife of our former director of artistic operations, Chris Cano, coming back here, a wonderful mezzo, frequent performer on the Met stage. And then this incredible baritone, Kidon Choi, who's just a force of nature as Amanazro, and then a wonderful supporting cast. So I feel like we've already delivered something that's really wonderful in terms of concert performance of these artists. But we said we have this really unique asset that many of you know about if you've been coming to our shows, thanks to our production of Riders of the Purple Sage back in 2017 and the generosity of the Virginia D. Piper Charitable Trust. We were able to acquire something that I think maybe only one other opera company in the country has, Atlanta Opera, a large video wall. We have 1,300 square feet of video wall. That's much larger than my first New York apartment. It's only a little bit smaller than my current house in Coronado. And so our first thought was, okay, well, what if we had some sort of visuals behind this concert to help support, to help create the atmosphere? Maybe there are sea turtles. I don't know what. I'm going to really be fixated on those sea turtles. I've got the staff's going to be hearing about the sea turtles all day. Once I say something more than 2 or 3 times, the staff knows it's like this is going to be a thing for probably weeks. And because we could do something really evocative that a lot of companies can't do because they don't have a resource like that. It still takes talent to be able to create compelling visuals even on that screen. It doesn't do it by itself. And then we decided we'd talk to David Murakami, who's an incredibly talented projection designer and film director. And David's based out of California. He was the projection designer for our 2018 production of Das Rheingold. Raise your hands if you saw that production. Okay, a handful. Really, man, it was really cool as heck. You should probably Google it when you get home if you want to see some images. But David has this incredible vision of how to make work like Rheingold or like AIDA feel both honorific of the tradition and also new at the same time. And he did that magnificently with the Rheingold. And we thought, this is the person we want to engage for this work. What started as a conversation that was somewhat simple in terms of what our visual idea was, became much more elaborate. And what we landed on, thanks to David's insights about where technology is today, and by the way, technology has always been involved in theater arts. We have, whether it's something as simple as, I can see right now both incandescent and LED lighting. Everything's moving to LED lighting. This is just one tiny example of over time. We don't use candles anymore. That would be a little dangerous. In every single element of theatrical production, technology has evolved over a period of time. So we said, why not integrate video technology that is of this time to create something that's actually more like a film and live music hybrid? And the tool that's available to you when you don't have a $100 million Pixar Films budget is generative AI, artificial intelligence. And David said, with the tools that we have today, for a sum of around maybe $100,000 or so, we think that we can create the world's first narrative AI film that can accompany this performance. Now, if you've seen anything like one of those John Williams at the symphony kind of thing, Star Wars playing in the background, or Harry Potter, or something like that, the general feel of this performance is like that in that sense, that there's this magnificent live performance happening at the same time as a film. But one of the big differences is we have this great cast. We have a wonderful conductor, Stephanie Rhodes Russell, who conducted our Romeo and Juliet last year. We want these people to be able to live fully into their vocal power, authenticity, phrasing, and what have you. When they do these performances, how can we make that performance not beholden to the film? And so this is another adaptation where we're going to have someone who's essentially a performer for the show, with a certain very special kind of controller where they are able to cue through the film in such a way that it will match to the tempi, to the sostenuto, to the fermatas and so forth of the performances, rather than the other way around. Because when you see those Harry Potter films, or Star Wars, or whatever, there's a click track. The conductor has to do exactly what's in their ear or on a screen, or they're going to be ahead or behind the film. So we really wanted to make the film supportive and supportive of the musical drama and subordinate to the musical and vocal forces that were on the stage. It's really ambitious. You have to be crazy to try something like this. And I've spent plenty of nights, thinking about, okay, how are people going to respond? We got plenty. I probably, not since I suggested changing the start time of our matinees from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. have I gotten as much hate online as when we proposed this project. Famously, one of our detractors called me a tech bro huckster, which is, and I still don't have the T-shirt for this. Tom, we gotta tech bro huckster T-shirts for everybody. But in all seriousness, even though I think Arizona Opera has it's more than a brand. We have a spirit of entrepreneurship, of innovation, of trying new things, not for innovation's sake, but to try to figure out how you make opera work in 2025. And that's how we came to this approach. It's really exciting. We're not sure exactly how people are going to react to it because it's the first time. And in my quiet moments when, I'm less on the Tourism Bureau or the general director, but just a human being who cares deeply about this art form that I've been connected to since I was 14 years old when I first started taking classical voice lessons, I have a profound reverence for opera. And that's why we innovate. That's why we innovate. So when I have that quiet moment with my wife, Kate, saying, okay, how's this gonna go? She says, you can't worry about that. Someone has to go first. Someone has to go first. And and in fact, it's not just me going first. It's not even just our company going first. It's all of us cumulatively together going first. It happens in an empty theater. Who cares, right? So I just wanted to say thank you for all of those who have your tickets already. Thank you for trying this adventure with us. If you don't have your tickets already, hopefully I've made you sufficiently curious as to try. If I've scared you a little bit, thank you. If I've scared you a little bit, welcome. But someone does have to try things first. And here's the wonderful news. If it's something that doesn't work from you from a visual standpoint, what I can promise you is we have assembled an extraordinary cast. We have a beautiful chorus and orchestra that are going to make Verdi's music come to life. And I have to tell you, you can't lose in that respect. So, David, thank you so much for letting me crash the party. I hope this was informative. I hope this was helpful. David has more, so I'm going to leave. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Joel. The first time I heard AIDA was a concert performance, Fairmount Park in Philadelphia with the Philadelphia Orchestra. Leontine Price was AIDA. Robert Merrill was Amonasro. Zubin Mehta was conducting, and that's all I remember. I really don't remember who the Radames was or the Amneris, but they were probably pretty good. Okay, so we went with that. So all joking aside, how Egyptian is AIDA? And I want to just at least touch on this idea, because actually in some circles AIDA is a bit controversial, and there's a bit of back and forth about AIDA. Edward Said, very famous Egyptian scholar and writer, rather famously disliked AIDA intensely. He thought it was an archetypal example of these things, a prime example of a cultural discourse relegating and confining the non-European to a secondary racial, cultural, and ontological status. He says that in Culture and Imperialism in 1993. But he also describes primitivism, which is an element of AIDA, as the subtle and persistent Eurocentric prejudice against Arabo-Islamic peoples and their culture, a culture depicted through European art as underdeveloped, stagnant, and inferior to Western society. So ancient Egypt is ancient, its pyramids in decay, its sphinxes almost buried in sand, the glory that was of the past, not present, not active, and indeed barbaric. And there are certainly those elements in AIDA. Others push back and say, well, not so much, not so much. And so like most things colonial, it's complicated, as I said at the beginning. So it depends on your lens. And one lens says Europe dominates everything, and we're looking at Egypt only through a European lens, through Verdi's lens and that of the librettists. Another one says, yeah, but Egypt is reaching out toward Europe. And so that there's an element of that here too. And in most ways, I would think you would say that AIDA is generally respectful of the culture it represents. The problem is it's a little cartoonish. It's a little bit, it relies on stereotypes. That's one of the issues. In our own time, there's another issue, which is that most often the sopranos who sing the role of AIDA don't look Ethiopian. They're not black. And even as recently as a summer or so ago, big discussions about what's the appropriate makeup for that actor to wear. We don't really hold with blackface anymore. It represents something really repugnant, but there are still some singers who do it and then get in trouble for it. So I just thought I'd show you, this to me is very interesting. Here is Teresa Stolz, who was a Czech soprano, and a favorite of Verdi's. She was the first AIDA in Italy. She didn't premiere the role, but she did the premiere in 1872 in Milan. There's her costume and her makeup. Now, as I look at that, I don't see anything that suggests blackface at all. Here's about 6 months later in Parma. And there clearly she is wearing makeup to darken her skin. Now, what I can't say with any authority is that done in sort of the post-production of the photograph, right? Or is it the makeup? I don't know. But already from the beginning, this was a discussion, and I think we have enough imagination that if somebody says they're Ethiopian, they can be Ethiopian without being made to look dark, right? We can figure that out. After all, if we can see Hamilton and George Washington can be played by a black actor, right? I mean, this is not all that complicated. It's pretend, it's make-believe. We can make believe. So this is another kind of controversy around AIDA. In fact, all of these works, no matter where they come from or their origin, when they're 150, 200 years old, they have things that we no longer find acceptable and that we have to figure out how to present in a way that doesn't distract us from what's really going on, right? We didn't go there for a political event. We go because we're caught up in the same story that Verdi was caught up in, that of people in impossible situations trying to make hopeless decisions. That's what attracts us. And we don't want to be distracted by these other things that are going on. So we have to find ways to cope with them. And I think this idea of having visuals on the screen that absolutely fit the story and that are synced to the people in real time, is staggering to me. That's really, really fascinating. A little sidelight, at ASU in 2016, I conducted Haydn's Creation. And we had something nowhere near as sophisticated as this, but we did have digital imagery that we created to go with it. And some of it was actually synced to the performance. But here's my little story about that. There was a camera on me as the conductor that apparently sent signals to the stuff that if I did something, some color would splash or something would happen on the screen. And they were really excited about this. And they would say, now, if you do this, and say, go ahead, do that, and something would happen. And they'd do that, and something would happen. I'd say, I have to conduct a performance. I don't think I'm going to try to cue the digital stuff, if that's okay with you. And it was, and so things happened, but not because I was intentionally trying to get the red splash to happen, but that's just what happened when I gave that cue. This is a lot more sophisticated than that. But I thought of it when Joel was talking about that idea of syncing things up. So that really comes to the end of my formal presentation. I'd like to open it to questions, but for me, opera audiences are always thoughtful. It's one of the most thoughtful art forms because you have to work as an audience member, right? You got to believe that people are going to sing their stories and so on. So be ready to work and have a good time. Yes, go ahead.
Has the company started rehearsals yet? Have you had a chance to try that out?
The question is, has the company started rehearsals yet, Jennifer?
I can do that one.
Joe, have you started rehearsing?
Yes, so the chorus has been rehearsing for a few weeks. The orchestra has their first rehearsal on Saturday. That's kind of the normal pattern for any opera that we do. And then the guest artists will be arriving the week of the production. So they'll be arriving, at the opening night on the 12th, so somewhere around the 7th.
Yeah, so you see, that's one of the savings, right, Joel? You don't have to put up 20 principal singers for 6 weeks to stage an opera.
Yeah, when you think about all those guest artists that come down and you need to have them in a hotel and they need to have food to eat and all those kinds of things, those are some of those multipliers that really make the cost add up.
Is that giving you a chance to try the technology in
I'm deferring to Joel because I have nothing to do with it.
Let's go back to sea turtles. That was easy. Yeah, so we'll be. We have a lot of experience working with the video wall itself. We are getting material from David Murakami, the production designer. He's sending over the bits and pieces and that kind of thing. So we don't have it loaded into Symphony Hall until I think we start loading in We start loading in Friday, so it'll be kind of an intense process the week of to see what's working, what's not working. I can say though with certainty though we're very experienced working with video all in general. Will we have surprises along the way? I'm certain of it, 100% certain.
So you heard about each of the actors having a clicker or some sort of?
Not the performers. There's one individual person who's going to be tracking basically what the conductor is doing, so that if in O Patria Mia the soprano wants to hang a big high note, that the film's not just going to click over to the next thing. So there'll be one person. I love the idea of with a PowerPoint clicker. Oh Patria Mia. We should do that the next time. We might want to do that. But, no, it'll be there's an individual performer. I don't think it'll be in the orchestra pit. I think.
In the orchestra pit, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Not in a booth someplace.
Not in a booth. I don't think so. No, we'll find out.
Will this video wall that you're doing for the first time be specific to just Arizona, or are you doing it in Tucson as well?
Oh, we'll be doing it in both Phoenix and Tucson. We do all of our performances in Phoenix and Tucson. That's one of those things that's also a multiplier in terms of our costs. We're one of only 3 opera companies in the country that's crazy enough to tour opera productions. The others being Florida Grand Opera, which performs in Dayton, Broward County, and then Virginia Opera, which has actually 3 cities they perform in. And from the production standpoint, you strike the set in Phoenix, you put it on a truck or trucks, take them down to Tucson, load them in. You have a full day of loading. You have to set lights and all that kind of thing. It's like doing 2 productions from the production standpoint.
I'd like you to speak briefly about Verdi as a person. 2 stories come to mind that I remember. One, obviously his first wife died tragically. He lost his children. He was devastated for the rest of his life. But it's the second story I'm interested in. As I remember from my reading, his first opera or second opera bombed, and the story goes that he never believed another review for the rest of his life. I wonder if you could talk about both of them.
So the question was a little bit about Verdi himself. Yes, he lost his whole family at a rather early stage. I believe his wife was in her 20s when she contracted, I think it was scarlet fever. And then the children got it. And so his wife and 2 young children died. This made Verdi unbelievably bitter and angry. He turned his back on the Roman Catholic Church. Actually lived out of wedlock with a woman for 10 years before they finally married. Strepponi was her name. And actually they were married shortly before AIDA, not long before. And then the other comment was he read a review early on and vowed never to read reviews again. I don't know of a performer in the world who has not said that and who isn't a liar. Right? I mean, you just can't help it. But like any performer, artist, creative personality, he was curious what people thought and then would get mad about it. But yeah, I mean, he certainly knew what the critics were writing.
On the reviewer thing, one of the wild things that I think all of us have experienced over the last few years is there really isn't such thing as critical press when it comes to the arts anymore. I mean, when I first moved to town here for the Arizona Republic, there was Kerr who wrote all the reviews for every single art form, regardless of his degree of experience. And I loved Kerr. I was glad that we had him. But almost to a 1, except for maybe the New York Times, there really aren't arts writers anymore. So the critical review is really you guys. What you guys are saying, you guys and gals, saying on social media, sharing with your friends. That's what matters. A lot of us are more experienced than the people that are still continuing to do arts writing to the extent that they exist. So it's really your endorsement or support of the stuff you didn't like as much as well that's really informing people, I think, as to what's going on.
When you were young,
No, I'm pushing 70.
you had music of the time. So I'm in the 60s, 70s, like that music. How do you get from that to opera? I mean, where do people evolve into wanting to go to opera that's different languages that they don't speak? How?
Yeah, see, for me, it's the other way around. Seriously, I was interested in classical music from a very early age and not very interested in the popular music of the time. So, you know, for me, it's the Beatles, and, you know, I can't even name who they were. Now I love the Beatles. You know, and I've become much, much less of a snob, but as a kid, I was brought up on musical theater and opera and classical music, and I sort of learned to play the piano, never really mastered it. So for me, it went the other way around. I can still remember feeling traumatized when my mother brought a Simon and Garfunkel album. And I mean, that completely turned my world upside down. Wait a minute, who's doing what here? So for me, it was the other route. And like you, I took voice lessons at a very early age. They didn't help me very much. I still have the same croaking voice. But yeah, I was fascinated by opera.
I want to take do you mind if I take the counterpoint on this?
Not at all. We should go on the road.
We should. As soon as we save enough for the sea turtles. We're taking donations specifically for the Sea Turtle Fund of Arizona Opera today. So I came almost the exact opposite direction from David. I started taking voice lessons when I was 14, not because I wanted to be Pavarotti or somebody like that. I took them because I had a rock band and I wanted to have better high notes. and I thought, well, if you like rock singers like Steve Perry or Freddie Mercury or whatever had taken classical voice lessons and that's how they had a great top, maybe that's the way that I could do it. And so that's actually the way that I came to opera. I did not have opera growing up in my home at all, 0%. I probably had Simon and Garfunkel, those whippersnappers, and maybe this answers the question. So I went to Arts High School, New World School for the Arts, Miami, Florida. It was basically the sister school to the LaGuardia School, the Fame School in New York. Same kind of approach, very competitive audition process, all that kind of stuff. And during the summers of after my junior and senior year in high school, I went to Tanglewood, where I was part of a program that was run by Boston University Tanglewood Institute. And it was during those periods of time when I became immersed in classical music, and probably the way that you grew up with. But I hadn't had that early on. And right around that same period of time, and maybe a little bit before my first summer in Tanglewood, I was at a chorus competition with my school I think it was in Tallahassee, Florida. Where all the opera is happening, of course. Tallahassee, alligator fighting, and Verdi. All you could have. And I still remember it. I can picture to this day, and I still have the same reaction. There was a faculty recital for the kids that were there for this voice competition, and there was one of the professors saying, "My man's gone now" from Porgy and Bess. And I remember, and this voice just soared. And I remember getting these I remember getting these goosebumps on my arm, and feeling like, it sounds so dumb, but I felt as excited hearing that. There's something that happened to me physiologically hearing that when I heard a really good, rock song, someone just wailing on a high note and crazy guitar solo. I had the same feeling, except that no one I knew in my contemporaries, my friends in school, had any exposure to opera. And I thought, wouldn't it be neat to be able to be part of revealing this crazy thing that made me feel this way, and share that experience with other people, and that idea of uncovering something that's so special. We know it. If you've been to an opera, you're here. You care enough about it. You know what I'm talking about. That feeling, and when you share it with someone for the first time, and they have that opera gene and they don't necessarily know it, and they experience this physiological rush from hearing this athletic feat performed the way that it is. Man, that's the bridge. I think the human voice is the bridge, and storytelling through song, people love it. I think especially the unamplified voices creates this particular effect. And Cassie Hollerbach, who's back there. Hi, Cassie, you back there? Cassie, hi, Cassie. Cassie runs our education program, which includes our opportunity tour. We do about 150 performances, 140, 150 performances in schools each year across the state. No one does this. No one does this, I don't think, anywhere in the country. And when you see kids experience people singing this way for the first time and they get that rush or glimpse of it, you see you see what's really possible. So, the hope is the kids. The problem is the parents, because a lot of the parents, weren't as tuned as David is, and did not necessarily have opera in their house, like my parents didn't. And when they don't have the exposure, they don't know that they have the opera gene, and they don't know that they love it. Isn't that awful? There's most of the people that love opera don't know that they love opera because they haven't heard it before. So it's our job, all of us, to be ambassadors for this thing. Get people to the theater, try it for the first time. It's not going to be for everyone. That's fine. But there are enough people that it's for if they hear it for the first time, to hear these incredible voices we're going to have on the stage. They'll get that rush. And then one last point here. There is no old in opera. We have 2 ages. We have young, that goes up to age 50. And beyond age 50, it is opera young. So just to be clear, you are opera young, David. There is no old in opera. Spectre 2028.
We have time for a question or 2 more. Yes.
Well, I've got one on production. When I saw AIDA back in the late before 2000, you almost sold out, I think, and that was with 3 performances. Now you're back to only 2 performances. Are you going to have people that are turned away? And what becomes?
We have good houses for the AIDA. We're not completely sold out. Part of the thing is, I think there's some people that are scared or otherwise uninterested in the film component. And I think also there are people who, if you're not a regular opera goer, if you're thinking about going to a concert of an opera, that can be a little intimidating or something like that. So we'll have good houses, but not sold out. And we have a general issue with people, like I said, being aware of opera, being excited about opera, building a big, exciting, bold future for opera. It mostly involves getting more people to come and experience it. So if you want to see full houses, the best thing that you can do is be an ambassador, invite a friend, buy them a ticket, and then buy us a sea turtle, because I feel like people are going to have expectations after this talk today.
And let's also think about Phoenix in 1999 versus Phoenix in 2025. I'll just say one word: traffic. Right? I mean, just even to park downtown now is so much more, right? They're roaming. So, because I faced this too at Arizona State, I came in 2002, and people were already nostalgic for another kind of Phoenix, where I had to say, yeah, but we don't live in that town anymore. The choral union that I conducted at ASU used to draw people from all over the valley. Well, now people don't want to come from Peoria or Glendale to ASU. They can't park. It takes an hour and a half to get there. So there are barriers now that didn't exist in 1999 that make Joe's job and everybody who works with him much more challenging than they were then. Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Okay, I have a question about the concert performance. I've stayed away from them. Do you actually see the people, the lead singers that are singing?
Yes,
live?
the lead singers will be on the stage. They'll be fully visible, and they'll be. What David has tried to do is to, at the point where there is exposition going on, the film tends to be more engaged and more dynamic, and there's more happening. But during the more contemplative moments, especially arias, we're really wanting to make sure we're taking in those live performances. It's not like we hit the pause button, but the image becomes more, more static. You'll be watching a character kind of thinking, but and this is one of the things we've been very intentional about, trying to think about how we do. We're hoping that the film is additive and not detracting from the live performance.
Always a challenge. Well, thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience. And I hope you enjoy AIDA. I'll be doing the pre-concert presentations on both nights, so please come. Thank you. Double act. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.